Alright, this is when there is decreased adrenal response. Okay, so you went from being in this resistance adaptation type of phase where you have a hyperadrenal response to where now your adrenal glands are just plumb worn out and you have a hypoadrenal response. So you lose the ability to buffer stress. And this is important. So if your adrenal glands aren't able to react to stress, you're losing that ability to buffer the stress. So this is when you will experience cortisol's negative, damaging effects on muscles, the brain, and the immune system. And so you can have severe dysfunction and collapse of organs or different systems. So there can be cardiovascular issues as a result of this, GI issues as a result of adrenal fatigue, skin problems, headaches, genitourinary issues, and many other problems. So your adrenal glands can't produce adequate amounts of cortisol. All right, so these people oftentimes have more pain, aches, inflammation going on in the body because they don't have that proper amount of cortisol to be used for anti-inflammatory effects. Okay, but also they have trouble regulating electrolytes and sex hormones. So this is an interesting point that the body has two forms of protection, right? Two forms of defense. So you have your immune system for internal threats, but then you also have the musculoskeletal system for external threats. This is your muscles, your bones, and joints. This is what allows you to be strong, to move around, to be quick, to fight or run away. Right? This is for external threats. Okay? So this is that fight or flight response. But remember, it may be a tiger trying to eat you, it may not be. It may be a financial stress that's causing that same response. So the interesting point is your body will not place equal attention on both protections at the same time. It has to prioritize. So if it perceives the external stress, fight or flight stuff, to be more of a threat than internal stresses like bacteria or cancer, it will focus its time and energy on what it perceives to be the greater threat. It will focus more of its time and energy on the musculoskeletal system if that's what it's perceiving to be the constant state of threat there. So that fight or flight response. So therefore, it will suppress, the adrenal glands have a suppressing effect on the immune system. So if you are constantly stressed, your body's perception and reality is skewed. So think about that. If you're constantly stressed, your body's thinking, I have a tiger trying to eat me all the time, every day, every week. Okay? So your perception of what's really going on in your reality is actually skewed. Alright? So this is what happens. You have increased stress. So increased stress. This will lead to increased fight or flight. Okay? So when we have this increased fight or flight, that leads to increased demand for energy. Okay, so there's an increased demand for energy, and that means an increased need or demand for glucose, sugar. Okay, and then this will lead to, because you have this increased demand for energy, for glucose, sugar, you're going to have an increased demand on the adrenal glands for them to produce more cortisol. Okay, and so when you have this chronic production of the cortisol happening, that eventually has this negative effect on the immune system, so it's going to decrease the immune system. Okay, and then that will further, because there's a decreased immune system, decreases your resistance, which leads to an increase infections, okay, infections. And so that increase in infections is just one of those forms of stress. So it adds another burden to the adrenal glands. So you have more stress on the adrenal glands because your body's dealing with more infections, repetitive infections, that sort of thing, because your resistance is down. And so that is one of the ways of how it will lead to adrenal exhaustion. Okay, just wiped out adrenal glands. So again, the fight or flight response is meant to be short-lived. And you were not meant to live in fight or flight as a lifestyle. Okay? But God has given you that gas stress response, that general adaptation response, as a means of protecting you. And God didn't design your body to be saturated with that cortisol hormone. Okay, so cortisol, there's a natural or normal circadian release of cortisol, and then there's an abnormal circadian release of cortisol. So the normal release of cortisol looks something like this. If you look at this chart here, that cortisol is at its highest at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and as the day goes on, it just dwindles and gets real low at nighttime, so that you can sleep or fall asleep at nighttime. And then if there is an abnormal cortisol circadian release of cortisol, is that cortisol level is high here in the morning, but it kind of stays high during the whole day. It's going to be high at nighttime when you're falling or when you're trying to sleep. Okay, so the only reason for an abnormal circadian release of cortisol is an alarm or defensive response by the body, and which creates a stress burden on the body. Therefore, the adrenals have to compensate. So there's two types of adrenal responses.